Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm going to be reviewing Daretti Ingenious Iconoclast, a new red and black Planeswalker that hit the vault this week for cash. I did a bit of live streaming of him earlier this week where I was figuring out a few things here and there. And yeah, the first time I tried him, I wasn't overly impressed. Now he's been growing on me, but before we get into all that, let's see what he has available in his kit. So here we are. 125 hit points. Pretty good. His 3 abilities here. His mana bonuses. Let's talk about that first. So he gets +4 on green, +3 on black, +2 on blue, and +1 on white. -2 on green. And I don't know if I've ever seen them do a color spread like this. It's pretty interesting. Nothing too crazy as far as what you get from his on-color mana bonuses, but his only downside being green means that cards that bump up your mana bonuses, like Sunken Citadel, you have the chance to take advantage of that. So does this mana spread work out okay in practice? It works okay. Like, I never get a ton of mana unless I get like a bunch of cascades happening. It's all fairly even. It's nice that you still get a decent amount of mana when you're matching blue and white gems a lot of times, and you don't have to feel as bad for being forced to make those swaps. I have a few cards in my decks that will make us get mana, not just due to the mana bonus. There's some extra benefit to matching those gems that will give us mana as well. And those I'm talking about activate gems, gold tokens, things like that. So just in case that wasn't clear. But let's talk about his abilities. So the first one we got, Scrap Mongering. Destroy the top 6 cards of your library. Then return the first 2 artifact cards from your graveyard to your hand. Those cards gain X mana. X is 2 plus the number of non-artifact cards in all graveyards, times 2 up to 15. So I actually really like this ability. Destroying the top 6 cards of your library means you're putting a lot of stuff in your graveyard. And depending on how you're building and what you have in your deck, that's going to be putting some artifact cards in your graveyard. It may take some time to get all of your artifacts into your graveyard so that you can take advantage of that mana you gain. But I found that once you've used this ability a couple times, not only are you going to be getting a lot of your artifacts in your hand, but it's going to be giving them a lot of mana. So this is by far the one I go to the most. It's the most useful for me. So we got being able to basically fetch artifacts and putting them into your hand with mana. But also just as important, if not more so, is destroying the top 6 cards of your library. You know, for a first ability, this is a good ability. Second ability, not so much. Create 6 scrap cogchair tokens. The creature is a spider construct. It is a 0/2 with can't attack defender. So when you create 6 of these, it's going to be a 0/12. When an opposing creature attacks, deal X damage to that creature. X is the number of this creature's reinforcements. This is the ability that I use the least by far. I just don't think it's a good enough creature, especially in today's meta, for it to justify needing to be on the battlefield. There's just so much better that you can do if you have any sort of half-decent collection. It's a blocker that can't attack, and, you know, until they add the artifact subtype to it, it's not even going to synergize with your other abilities, which the third one we'll get into here. And I think that's an oversight, and I do believe that WebCore is going to work to fix that. But for now, there's a missing subtype, and here's what the token looks like. His third ability, Academic Reclamation. Deal X damage to each opposing target. X is the number of artifacts you control, including their reinforcements. Then you reinforce your artifact cards 3 times. It takes a lot of building around this ability to make it even worth using, because a lot of times when I use this ability, it's only doing like 4 to 8 damage to my opponent and his creatures. And, you know, depending on what kind of creatures are on the battlefield, 8 damage to all of them can actually be impactful. But most of the time, I've noticed that it's not, unless I am using very specific builds. The thing about this one is it's very dependent on what's on the board. So you could be building for it and you could get potentially massive damage from it. It's really going to depend on not only what you are putting on the battlefield, but also what your opponent is letting you keep on the battlefield. Because if they're running heavy support or creature destruction, then likely you won't have very many artifacts on the board to really make an impact with this ability. The most I've seen it deal damage for me is in the 40 range, and that's after, I had my board state already very much locked in, and it just ended up being sort of a win more, because if I have that many artifacts on the battlefield, then that probably means I'm doing all right, and using that ability wasn't really that necessary. I guess it could speed up a win maybe by a turn or so, but other than that, it's just not that impactful of an ability. So let's do the pros and cons really quickly. The first ability is a great way to fetch artifacts you want and give them a good amount of mana, as well as sending things to your graveyard, enabling effects from other cards to happen more easily. As you'll see in my decks, I take full advantage of this aspect of the ability. But its cons, that second ability is fairly ineffective and just not a strong enough creature to justify taking up a creature slot that could be better served with a different creature card. So the way that I would have probably improved this token to make it a little bit more impactful is that whenever this creature takes damage, that damage is transferred back to all of your opponent's creatures and your opponent. So that would have made it really strong and really difficult to deal with and justify it taking up a creature slot, because a creature that's not going to attack has to really hold its own on some level. People like Phyrexian Vindicator, and an ability that essentially gives you one would actually be pretty strong. But I don't know, that's just me. And then its third ability can scale up in strength, but is hugely dependent on what you have on the board and battlefield. And yeah, that's pretty much what I explained just a few minutes ago. But let's get into the decks that I built. Okay, so this first deck I'm going to showcase here, I'm trying something out a little bit different, and it's partially inspired by some of the other content creators who like to showcase Planeswalkers just on their own merits. And so one of the ways that I saw them doing that was using decks that are mainly built out of either Origins decks or just, commons and uncommons up to some rares. So that's what I thought I would do here, is show you, okay, how well can Daretti do just with Origins cards here. So, I'm using the full range of Origins cards I have available to me. And so I'm using, mythics and stuff that I have available. I, of course, have the full set of Origins, and I think people should try and do the same. So this was the best deck that I could come up with for him out of Origins cards. We got Hangerback Walker, which is an artifact. We got Pyromancer's Goggles, sort of the Animist, and Brawler's Plate as our other artifacts. I mean, I could have tried some more artifact creatures, but I didn't think they were really that good enough. So I got, Infinite Obliteration and Unholy Hunger are some of the better spells. Demolish, of course. There really isn't much in terms of gem conversion here, so that's where you kind of lose out on a lot of the speed that you can build with more modern cards in your deck. And so my results were that it really struggled against meta decks. The usual suspect decks, GTA decks, really was hard to keep up with it. It's just the slow speed of getting everything on the board and setting up just right. You're just going to get outpaced by everything. So his first ability is still all right. These are really expensive artifacts, a lot of them that I'm using here, but sort of the Animus and Brawler's Plate, if you have enough of those in your graveyard. If you have enough artifacts in your graveyard, they're going to get out quickly. But these artifacts aren't really helping you cast cards so much. Pretty much have to have a creature on board already to take advantage. I would maybe switch out these creatures for some cheaper ones so I can take advantage of the equipment easier. And then just hold on and wait until I get a hangerback walker on the battlefield. From there, you can just kind of hold on, try and keep your opponent at bay with Unholy Hunger and Infinite Obliteration, and just wait until you got enough Thopters on the board, and then use his third ability to really make your Hangerback Walker stronger, and it's also going to make your Thopters stronger. From that point, if you're able to keep all your creatures on the board, then you should actually be doing a decent amount of damage with his third ability. But I still think his first ability is going to be the most useful in this deck. You're going to be able to pull your artifacts into your hand and have your creatures take advantage of those once they're on the battlefield. So he sort of failed the Origins test for me, which knocks him down, I guess, a little bit in my book. But I don't know. What do you guys think of this whole concept? Do you want to see me keep building Origins decks for the future Planeswalkers that we get in this game? Let me know and I'll consider it. So these were the battles that I won, and I truly think that I only won these battles because of the relative weakness of my opponents in this scenario here. So I thought I would show you these here and let you decide on how you feel about his abilities when they're in this context. But now let me show you a deck that I think is actually very fun, and I think you'll enjoy watching the gameplay a little bit more. All right, so this deck is mainly built around the Gitrog and his ability to destroy your creatures for massive gain. We're updating it with a lot more modern cards here. I think this deck will mostly survive the upcoming standard rotation, though we will be losing Wrenn 6 and Invoke Despair, but Invoke Despair is mostly just here as a catch-all removal and a little bit of extra card draw, of course. And then Wrenn 6 is a very strong gem converter in this deck because of the way that you can take advantage because of your graveyard growing. The way this deck works is the thing you want to do is get Koth Fire Resistance on the board. Well, actually, there are a few different ways to win in this deck. You could just win off the strength of the creatures themselves. You have the choice to destroy them with the Gitrog, but if you don't, then Necromancy and his third ability will make your artifact creatures very strong. You'll be reinforcing them pretty easily. And the nice thing about this deck is, so you destroy your creatures and you can just bring them all back with Necromancy and Portal to Phyrexia. And Portal to Phyrexia is an artifact, so that synergizes with his first ability and even with his third, because his third is going to be reinforcing your artifact supports as well. The way that the Gitrog works is when you destroy a creature with it, it converts gems to the amount of power that that creature has, and it's going to always convert to one of the colors that the creature is. So that's why we have Heavyweight Demolisher in our deck. Not only is it a pretty strong creature on its own, and it's also got Unearth and Buried, so that's kind of a neat way to bring it out as well. But what we really care about is that it's a red artifact with a lot of power. So when it's destroyed by the Gitrog, it's going to be converting at least 8 gems to red. So that's why we want Koth Fire Resistance down, so that when we convert gems to red, we're getting a massive benefit from it. We're going to be doing a similar thing with Suchi Caveguard, except it's colorless, so Suchi Caveguard is going to be converting to gems of any color instead of just one. So it's kind of random which colors it chooses to convert to, and it's never all the same color either. So we're not really destroying it for that. We're destroying it to get a lot of mana into our hand, because when Suchi Caveguard gets destroyed on your turn, you get 23 mana to your hand. So as we get the Gitrog, Suchi Cave Guard, and either Portal or Necromancy on the board, we're going to be destroying the Gitrog. We're going to be drawing, max 6 cards, but we would potentially be drawing 8 cards when it gets destroyed. And then we're putting 23 mana into our hand. And the great thing about the Gitrog is the order of operations for when you trigger it. So you draw the cards first, then you convert the gems, and then you get the mana from Suchi Cave Guard. So you don't have to worry about not having any cards in your hand or enough cards in your hand to take advantage of all that mana you're about to get, because this combo is going to be filling your hand with cards, and you're probably going to be filling up at least like the first 2 or 3 cards in your hand, depending on what you're playing. So that is really awesome. And that's going to be fueling the rest of your hand. And of course, you know why I love connecting the dots. So this is also good because you don't have to rely on having things in your graveyard for connecting the dots to work. All you need is just to have things in your exile. So that's an extra way to get things down on the battlefield. Use his first ability to grab the artifact supports, and then you can use connecting the dots to put your creatures into play before you can pull them out of your graveyard. So there's a lot of fun synergy happening here. Cryptex is, of course, going to be a good card in this deck because Daretti's highest mana bonuses are on red. So it's always going to be converting gems to red. So that's also going to help with Kothfire resistance as you go. And then red and 6, the more times you use his first ability, the more gems you're going to be converting. And likely you'll be converting to a lot of red gems too. So there's a lot of fun things happening here. A lot of things kind of playing hand in hand with each other. So this is a really fun deck. I wouldn't say it's the most competitive one. Almost put this in the more novelty category of a deck, even though it can be super powerful. It's just not super reliable for a lot of defense. We've got Portal to Phyrexia and Invoke Despair, and sometimes Suchi Cave Guard as our only defense. A lot of times I'm going to be destroying my Suchi Cave Guard and not having it as a defender on the battlefield when I need it to be anyway. But I do like that there are a couple different ways to win with this deck. I found this deck to be a lot of fun to work with. But what I really want to show you here is this next deck that is really strong. So let's go ahead and share that with you now. All right, this deck. Oh man, I love this deck. When I was first constructing this deck, I just wanted to go all in with Graveyard. Just deciding what to do with it is really try and put as much cards into either player's graveyard as I can. Obviously, we got Breach the Multiverse to do that to our opponent, but we're mostly worrying about our own graveyard here. Though Breach the Multiverse is good to take advantage of not only getting your own stuff on the board, but to steal maybe a card or two from your opponent that might be useful for you. Shieldred will also do that as well. So this deck is actually decently defensive. First of all, we got Angel of Suffering, which will, if you take damage or lose life while it's on the board, you will get it healed right back and also put cards into your own graveyard. But also Shieldred and Cityscape Leveler do really well to clear out my opponent's side of the board, at least mostly with creatures, but Cityscape Leveler can take care of everything else on my opponent's side besides Vanguards. But Shieldred can also destroy Vanguards as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening here. I found that defensively, it's actually quite good because you're getting Cityscape Leveler on the battlefield either through his first ability, Breach the Multiverse, or sometimes even Shieldred if you get it to that stage in her saga, which we'll talk about in a sec. So an early Cityscape Leveler is always difficult for most players to deal with. And then we got Necromancy to bring it back to the battlefield in case it gets destroyed. So when it comes back and is attacking again, it's going to be continuously destroying things for us. Shieldred, we can get on the battlefield in a few different ways as well. We got Breach the Multiverse. Necromancy is a really good card in this deck because not only can it bring out any of my creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield, but it's going to be reinforcing the Cityscape Leveler and Angel of Suffering at the end of each turn, as well as also creating a way to destroy my library. And that will be fueling Ren and 6, which will also be converting lots of gems for us. And then we got a number of different ways to get all of our things onto the battlefield. Mox Jet is great. Shieldred, Breach, and Necromancy are pretty high cost, so Mox Jet is going to make them easy to be put out. Chimil, the Inner Sun, getting us some cards, and also getting them lots of mana. And then Cryptix, I already covered why Cryptix is a great card to add to any Daretti deck, really, if you have it. So we got also Mana Crypt, and we have 5 artifacts in our deck. So we're likely going to be getting a lot of mana into our hand when we use his first ability. As always, keep spamming his first ability, pump up that Ren and 6. When Shieldred transforms, if you're not super familiar with Shieldred yet, when she enters the battlefield, she's going to be destroying the first opposing creature. So that's some removal right there. And then if there are enough cards in your opponent's graveyard, she's going to be exiled and converted into a saga support. And that first chapter of the saga is also going to be removing a creature or a vanguard. That the second chapter is going to be discarding cards. So that's also going to help keep you safe. And then the third ability is where a lot of the fun happens, where you just get to pull everything that you've been chucking into your graveyard back into play, as well as taking whatever you put into your opponent's graveyard and putting it into play for you there as well. So once you get to that third chapter of the saga, you're pretty much on your way to winning. This deck holds its own in Legacy Training Grounds even. I think it has yet to lose a match. And you wouldn't think that it would be so strong defensively, but from how much I've used it so far, it's been rare that I've gotten even close to losing. And even if I am, Angel of Suffering, if you get it large enough and you have enough things in your opponent's graveyard, it's got lifelink, so you're going to be getting some of that life back if you've taken some damage while on your way to victory there. So the way that Necromancy is always reinforcing your non-legendary creatures means that Angel of Suffering can usually attack a creature or two before it dies anyway. And even if it does, Necromancy is just going to bring it back to the battlefield anyway. So with all the creature removal that's usually happening with Shieldred and Cityscape Leveler, your Angel of Suffering is actually going to be pretty safe a lot of the time. So this deck is really powerful and easily the best deck that I built for Daretti. I think I would trust it in a handful of ranked events that are out there if I wanted to use it for that. So definitely give this one a try if you can. I know it's a lot of masterpieces and mythics, but there's a good reason for why all of these cards are in the deck. So if you can build something that works in a similar way, even if you don't have all the cards, I think you'll have a pretty fun time using it. Okay, now let's get to the grades. All right, it's time for everyone's favorite part of the video where I hand out grades. Maximum hit points, I'm giving it A+, so 125, very respectable. It's pretty much cut and dry, right? So 120 to 130 is the A range for me. Anything more than that is just gravy. You hardly need more than 130 hit points in this game, but if you're going to have them, then I'm going to bump you up a bit for it. His mana spread, it is a little bit flat, but at least on color matches are a respectable 7 and 6. So that I give that a B+. His first ability, it is an A+ ability for me. It does a lot for you. It can generate a lot of mana for you. And it's a little bit of targeted fetch, even though it's, fetching from the graveyard, but still, as long as you have artifacts in your graveyard, you're going to be doing a lot with it. And then even if not, if you're just using cards like I showed you, Necromancy, Portal to Phyrexia, Virtue of Persistence, that's going to be bringing back tons of creatures every turn from your graveyard. So pretty awesome ability in that way. Ability 2, not very awesome at all. I just don't even really use it at all. I think it's just a waste of a creature slot a lot of times for me. So it's very ineffective. So I give it a D. Third ability can be a little bit more effective than his second ability, but it's either a win more or not really doing a lot for you. So I give it a C minus. I mean, I'm sure people out there will try and build something to break this ability and make it really impactful. But in order to do that, you're going to be building something that's is probably going to be winning easily for you, regardless of if you use this ability or not. Versatility. So he is very dependent on the artifacts that you're using in order to maximize him, but his graveyard, but his ability to destroy your library allows a lot of really cool graveyard recursion effects to happen. And so he's, for a dual color walker, he's pretty good at that. You can use this to your advantage and really create a deck that takes full advantage of putting things from your graveyard into play for free or just a very minimal mana expenditure. So I give him a C plus just because you can build very strong decks around his first ability, but it is very dependent on what type of cards you're going to be using in your deck. He's not necessarily going to be versatile all around planeswalker like some of the others that we've reviewed recently. Card utility. Well, if you're using artifacts, he's really good at getting them out on the battlefield. So I took full advantage of that when I was playing him. His third ability, reinforcing your artifact creature. If you're using artifact creatures with a lot of power to them, then his third ability is a little bit more useful, but it's also dependent on the cards in your library that you're using and on the battlefield. So as long as you're using artifacts, he's quite good. So I give him a B in card utility. Fun. Well, this one is obviously the most subjective, but my honest opinion is I did not like him at first. I didn't really like playing him until I got really into maximizing that first ability. Then his fun grew on me. Were his second and third abilities more impactful, I think he'd be way more fun. But for now, he's actually kind of a B minus range for me in the fun category. I can have a lot of fun with him, but it's a very narrow type of fun. So, his final grade, I give him a B minus. At first, he was more in the C minus to C range, but then as I got more familiar with his abilities and how to maximize them, and I came across some really fun deck synergies, he became a lot more fun for me. His unique ability for a red-black planeswalker to put a lot of things into your graveyard, up the utility of him. So I could see myself using him in certain events that require you to put a lot of things into your graveyard. He can be a lot of fun in that regard. But I think he's going to be very dependent on what's in standard right now. Fortunately, we have a lot of good artifacts in standard. And, there's obviously going to be a bunch of stuff in legacy. When we get the next standard rotation, which is going to be probably in September, is my guess, with the next, main Magic the Gathering set that comes out, that will be in the early fall. And that is when the 3-year rotation is supposed to take place. We won't be losing any of the Dominaria Brothers War Saga sets. So that's where we have the majority of our artifacts that we're playing in standard right now. But There's a lot of good artifacts in not only Ixalan, but Murs at Karlov Manor. So this guy will be useful in standard for a very long time, and I think he'll be worth picking up for gold once you're able to, and that might not be a while. I would definitely recommend picking up for gold. If you found what I showcased here to be worthwhile in terms of money you spend on him, then I don't think it's a dumb purchase at all. I think that he can be very fun and very useful. And I didn't quite feel that way the first time I used him, but he's definitely earned a spot in my thoughts about the game when it comes to wanting to achieve certain things while I play. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my review. As always, thank you so much, Webcore, for letting me use this Planeswalker. I appreciate that they're still trying to make some interesting Planeswalkers, even if I don't necessarily love them at first and they take some time to unravel. I kind of felt that way about Jace the Perfected Mind. He's definitely grown on me since I've used him. And the fact that he's grown on me so quickly means that there's something to be acknowledged about that. Then, as always, make sure you are subscribed to the channel because I have a few more ideas for videos in the works that are not necessarily related to card reviews or Planeswalker reviews, just more nuts and bolts, how to play the game sort of stuff. I hope to see you there and enjoy the game until then.